The morning light slipped softly through the tall glass windows of the penthouse, painting everything in gold. The city below was still half asleep. The quiet hum of distant traffic mixed with the slow ticking of a clock. Inside it was peaceful. Too peaceful. Amara moved carefully across the marble floor, her small footsteps making almost no sound. The scent of freshly brewed coffee floated through the air. She had been working in this house for only 2 weeks, but it already felt like another world. Too silent, too perfect, too far from her own small apartment where noise never stopped. She placed a cup of coffee on the large dining table, her hands steady but her heart unsure. Every time she stepped into this room, she felt the weight of wealth pressing on her chest, not just from the gold accents and tall ceilings, but from him, Ethan Miles, the man she worked for. He sat at the end of the table, reading something on his tablet. His face looked calm but distant like a painting, handsome but cold. The faint sound of his spoon tapping against the cup broke the silence. "Good morning, sir," she said quietly, trying to sound confident. He looked up. His eyes met hers in sharp blue, unreadable. Then for the first time he smiled just a little. "Morning, Amara," he said softly. His voice was deep, quiet, like it belonged to someone who didn't talk much. She didn't expect him to remember her name. For a second she stood frozen, holding a tray of toast. "Would you like anything else, sir?" He shook his head. "No, that's fine. Thank you." The faint hum of the refrigerator filled the pause. She turned to leave, but her elbow brushed the edge of the counter. A porcelain cup slipped from the tray and shattered against the floor. The sound echoed sharply through the still room, the kind of sound that didn't belong in such a calm place. "Oh no," she gasped, kneeling quickly. "I'm so sorry." He stood up immediately. "It's all right," he said, his voice firm but not angry. He crouched down beside her. For a moment, both of them were on the cold marble, reaching for the same broken pieces. Their hands touched, just lightly for a second, but she felt it, that spark that made her pull her hand back too fast. The sound of her quick breath filled the quiet. He froze for a moment too, looking at her, not in anger but in surprise. "It's fine," he said again, softer this time. "You didn't cut yourself?" She shook her head, not daring to meet his eyes. "No, sir." He smiled again, small, calm, and gone too quickly. Then he stood, walked to the sink, and brought back a small towel. "Here, just in case." She took it, her fingers trembling slightly. The moment was simple, but in the stillness it felt like more than that. The quiet sound of the city came through the windows again, faint and far away, as if the world outside had forgotten them. When the last shard was cleared, she stood and whispered, "Thank you." He didn't answer at first. He looked out the window instead, his eyes softening. "You're new here," he said finally. "You'll get used to the silence." It takes time. She didn't know what to say. The way he said silence sounded heavy and as if it wasn't peace to him but loneliness. "Yes, sir," she replied quietly. He glanced at her again, his gaze thoughtful. "You don't have to call me sir all the time." Her eyes widened slightly. I didn't mean to be rude." "You're not," he said, a faint smile tugging at the edge of his mouth. "Just makes me feel old." For the first time she laughed softly. The sound was light, pure, something the room hadn't heard in a long time. Even he seemed surprised by it. The moment passed, but something lingered. Something unspoken. She turned to leave once more, carrying the empty tray close to her chest. Behind her, he sat again at the table, pretending to read. But his eyes stayed on her reflection in the glass window. The ticking clock grew louder, filling the air with slow rhythm, one tick, one breath, one glance at a time. As she reached the kitchen door, she paused. "Would you like me to bring breakfast to your office later?" she asked. He looked up again, his expression unreadable but kind. "Yes, around 10, she nodded, almost smiling. "All right." The door clicked softly behind her. He leaned back in his chair, looking at the spot where the cup had fallen. For some reason, he couldn't stop thinking about her voice, soft but full of something he hadn't heard in years. Warmth. Outside, the morning light grew brighter. Inside, the sound of the city slowly faded into silence again. But this time it didn't feel so empty. He exhaled, a faint sigh mixing with the soft hum of the room. The cup was broken, yes, but something new had quietly begun. The clock ticked on, steady and slow, and for the first time in a long while the millionaire felt awake. The next morning began quietly, just like the last. The city outside buzzed faintly, but inside the penthouse everything was calm, a soft kind of silence that made small sounds feel big. The clink of spoons, the faint sound of toast popping, the gentle hum of air conditioning. Amara moved around the kitchen carefully, her fingers brushing over polished counters. She still felt embarrassed about yesterday. The broken cup, the moment their hands touched, and the way her heart had raced without reason. She tried not to think about it, but every small sound reminded her of that quiet pause they shared on the marble floor. Ethan was already at the table, reading his morning emails. He looked the same, calm, controlled, dressed in a dark shirt with sleeves slightly rolled up. His presence filled the space, yet he never tried to. When she set the tray before him, he looked up briefly. "Morning, Amara," he said. She smiled politely, her voice soft. "Good morning, sir." He raised an eyebrow, a faint trace of amusement on his lips. "Didn't we agree you'd stop calling me that?" Her cheeks warmed. "Sorry, it's just habit," he smiled, but didn't push further. For a moment she thought the silence would return, that cold, perfect stillness that made her nervous. But then he spoke again, almost casually. "Do you cook?" She blinked, surprised by the question. "Cook?" "Yes," he said, setting his tablet aside. "I'm tired of eating what the chef sends up every day. I was thinking maybe you could help me make dinner tonight." She stared at him, unsure if she'd heard right. "Me, but I'm not a professional cook. I only make simple things." "That's exactly what I want," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Something simple. Something real." The word real hung in the air between them. She couldn't tell if he was talking about food or something deeper. Her hands tightened on the tray. "If you're sure, sir, I mean Mr. Miles." He nodded slightly. "Ethan," he corrected gently. She hesitated, then whispered, "All right, Ethan." The sound of his name on her lips made him look up for just a second longer than necessary. The silence that followed wasn't awkward this time. It was slow, heavy, and strangely warm. That evening, the penthouse felt different. The lights were dimmer, softer. The steady ticking of the clock was joined by faint jazz music from a speaker in the corner. Outside, rain began to fall, tapping gently against the wide glass windows. Amara stood at the counter, chopping vegetables with quiet focus. She could feel his eyes on her from time to time, though he pretended to be reading. The sound of her knife against the board became part of the rhythm of the room, steady, careful, human. "Do you always look this serious when you cook?" he asked after a while, his voice calm but teasing. She smiled faintly without turning. "I'm trying not to embarrass myself," he chuckled, standing to join her. "You won't. Here, let me help." When he reached for the same knife, their fingers brushed again. The heartbeat sound returned, soft, steady, almost part of the music now. She pulled her hand back too quickly, bumping a small bowl that rolled toward the edge. He caught it just in time. Their eyes met. Close now, too close. For a few seconds, neither spoke. Only the rain and their breathing filled the space. "Careful," he murmured, his voice lower. She nodded, her throat tight. "Thank you." He smiled faintly, but didn't step back. "You really are nervous around me, aren't you?" Her eyes widened. "No, I just don't want to make mistakes." "You haven't," he said simply. The words were quiet, but they felt heavier than they should. She could feel her pulse in her ears. She turned away quickly, pretending to focus on the pan. "Can you pass me the salt?" He did, their fingers grazing again. It wasn't on purpose, but neither of them apologized. As the food began to cook, the air filled with the soft hiss of oil and the comforting scent of herbs. The warmth made the room feel smaller, almost like a home. He watched her move, careful, precise, but with grace. She wasn't like the people who usually surrounded him. There was no show, no performance, just quiet truth. When she finally served the dish, she looked nervous again. "I don't know if it's any good." He tasted it. Then he looked at her, not with his usual cool distance, but with a slow, genuine smile. "It's perfect." Something in her chest fluttered. "Really?" He nodded. "Better than any chef's dinner I've had in months." Her laughter broke the silence again, soft and pure. It echoed off the marble and glass, filling the lonely space with life. He leaned on the counter, watching her. "You should smile more," he said quietly. "It suits you." Her eyes lowered. I don't smile much. Maybe you should start. The rain grew louder outside, a soft, steady rhythm against the glass. In that warm kitchen, surrounded by simple food and quiet laughter, something invisible began to form, a thread neither of them could name yet. When she turned to leave for the night, he called out softly, "Same time tomorrow?" She paused at the door, her voice barely a whisper. "If you want." "I do." The sound of the door closing was gentle, almost hesitant, like the end of a scene that neither of them wanted to finish. He looked at the empty plate in front of him, then at the rain outside, and for the first time in years, Ethan Miles smiled. Not for a deal, not for a camera, but for something simple, real, and human. The rain hadn't stopped since last night. It fell in thin sheets across the tall glass windows, painting moving shadows across the marble floor. The sky was gray, the city below blurred by mist. Inside the penthouse, warmth replaced the storm. The smell of coffee, the faint sound of jazz, and the steady rhythm of a clock ticking somewhere far in the background. Amara stood by the counter, drying the last few dishes. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the glass. She looked calm on the outside, but her mind wasn't. Every time she thought of last night, of him standing close beside her, of his voice saying, "Maybe you should start smiling," her heart skipped a beat. It wasn't just attraction, it was confusion too. He was her boss, a man from another world. She didn't even understand why he asked her to cook with him. Maybe he was lonely. Maybe it was pity. Or maybe, she thought, brushing that idea away, maybe it was nothing at all. Then came his voice again. "Amara." She turned quickly. Ethan stood near the doorway, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, holding a stack of papers. He looked more relaxed than usual, like he hadn't slept much but didn't mind. "Yes?" she asked softly. He stepped closer. "Do you have a minute?" "Of course." He placed the papers on the counter, designs for something, maybe his company's project, and rubbed his forehead. "I've been working on these layouts for hours. I think I need another opinion." Her brows lifted slightly. "Mine?" He smiled faintly. "Yes, yours. You have good taste. Yesterday's dinner proved that." Her cheeks turned warm. She tried to hide her smile as she walked closer to look. The scent of his cologne brushed past her, light, woody, comforting. She leaned over the papers, tracing her finger along a design she didn't fully understand. "I think," she began hesitantly, "this one feels too empty. Maybe something small here," she said, pointing to a corner. Ethan looked down at her hand. Her fingers trembled slightly, but her voice was steady. "You notice details," he murmured. She glanced up at him and suddenly realized how close they were. His face was inches away, his eyes calm, his breath slow. She swallowed and quickly stepped back. "Sorry, I didn't mean to." Before she could finish, her hand slipped against the smooth surface of the counter. The towel she'd left earlier slid away and her balance faltered. She gasped, and in that instant, he caught her wrist. The world seemed to stop. The rain, the ticking clock, even her breath. Everything went quiet. His hand held hers firmly, not rough, not too tight, just steady. Their eyes met. For a moment no one moved. The soft hum of the air conditioner became the only sound. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. She nodded quickly, though her pulse raced so loud it felt like he could hear it. "Yes, I just slipped." He didn't let go right away. His thumb brushed her wrist unconsciously. A small, gentle movement, but it sent warmth rushing through her. When he finally released her hand, she felt the absence like a chill. "Be careful," he said quietly. "You keep almost falling near me." She smiled nervously, looking down. "Maybe it's you. You make people forget how to stand straight." He chuckled softly, a warm, rare sound that made her glance up again. "I'll take that as a compliment." "It wasn't meant to be," she said, though the faint smile on her lips betrayed her words. He leaned on the counter, watching her. "You're different, Amara. You don't pretend. I'm just doing my job. Maybe that's why it feels like more than that." The air between them shifted again, softer, deeper. It wasn't something either of them planned, but it was there. The unspoken understanding. The quiet longing that filled the room without words. She turned back to the sink, pretending to focus on the dishes, though her hands weren't steady anymore. Behind her, he exhaled slowly. "Would you like to stay for dinner again tonight?" he asked after a long pause. Her hand froze mid-motion. "Dinner?" Yes, I could use the company. There was something honest in the way he said it. Not commanding, not flirtatious, just lonely. She hesitated, biting her lip. All right, if you really want me to. I do. The sound of rain softened. The room felt warmer again. That evening she arrived just as the city lights began to glow. The rain had turned into a fine drizzle. The penthouse smelled faintly of lemon and coffee. Ethan was already in the kitchen this time, sleeves rolled up again, trying and failing to chop vegetables neatly. She laughed softly at the sight. You're going to cut your hand, he looked up, grinning. I thought I'd surprise you. By ruining dinner? By trying, he said, pretending to be serious. She moved closer, gently taking the knife from his hand. Their fingers brushed again, this time slower, longer, neither pulling away immediately. The air thickened, heartbeat-like sounds almost blending with the rain outside. Her breath hitched slightly. He noticed, but instead of speaking, he just smiled. Soft, patient. Show me how it's really done, he said. She nodded, pretending to focus on the cutting board, though her mind wasn't on the vegetables. Every move felt like it carried more meaning than it should. Every glance, every small laugh, every silent second between them. When the dinner was finally ready, they ate together again, seated side by side this time instead of across the table. The warmth from the food mixed with something invisible, something that felt new, fragile, and real. Outside, the rain stopped. Inside, the silence returned, but now it wasn't empty. It was full of everything they didn't say. The night air carried a soft calm after the long rain. The city lights shimmered against wet streets and faint music played from somewhere distant. Slow, soothing, almost like a memory. Inside the penthouse, the glow from the fireplace painted warm colors across the room. The clock ticked gently, steady as a heartbeat. Amara stood near the window, her reflection half blurred by the glass. She'd just finished cleaning up the kitchen, but she hadn't left yet. Something about tonight felt different, quieter, more alive. Ethan sat on the couch, a glass of water in his hand, his expression unreadable. He wasn't working, not reading, not typing, just staring at the flickering fire as if it held an answer he'd been looking for. She hesitated before speaking. You look tired, she said softly. He glanced up, the light catching his eyes. Maybe I am, but not in the way you think. Her brows furrowed slightly. What do you mean? He gestured toward the empty chair across from him. Sit. She hesitated, then crossed the room quietly. The sound of her steps blended with the faint crackle of firewood. She sat slowly, folding her hands in her lap. Ethan leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. You ever feel like your life looks perfect from the outside, but inside it's falling apart? She nodded, though she didn't know exactly what he meant. Yes, she said quietly. Every day feels like that sometimes. He smiled faintly, but his eyes didn't match it. I've built companies. I've traveled the world. I've been called everything. Smart, successful, powerful. He paused, his voice lowering. But not happy. Not even close. She looked at him carefully. You seem strong. I learned how to look that way, he said, letting out a tired sigh. But truth is, I've been alone for years. The fire popped gently. She didn't speak. He continued, his tone slow and raw. My wife left me 6 years ago. We married too young. She loved the money, the parties, the noise. I loved the idea of not being alone. When she left, she took all of that noise with her, and left silence instead. Amara's eyes softened. I'm sorry, he shook his head. Don't be. Maybe it was meant to happen. But since then, I haven't let anyone close. I keep people at a distance. It's easier that way. Silence followed. Not cold silence, but something warmer, an understanding kind. Amara looked at the man before her and realized that beneath the sharp suits and confident tone, he was just lonely. I think loneliness makes us quieter, she said finally, but it doesn't always mean we want to be. He looked up at her, surprised by the truth in her words. You sound older than you are, she smiled softly. Life teaches fast when you don't have much. Ethan leaned back, studying her. Tell me about you, he said. She shook her head. There's nothing interesting to tell. I doubt that, he said gently. Amara took a slow breath. The faint hum of the heater filled the pause. I grew up in a small town. My mother was sick most of the time. I started working early. Moved here to send money back. I don't really have a story. Just a routine. He frowned slightly. That's still a story. One you're surviving. She looked at him, the firelight reflecting in her eyes. Sometimes surviving feels like the only thing I know how to do. He didn't speak for a while. Instead, he stood and walked toward the piano in the corner of the room, an instrument that hadn't been touched in years. The wooden lid creaked softly as he opened it. You play? She asked. Not well, he said, pressing one key gently. A low note filled the air, soft, rich, almost like a sigh. My mother taught me when I was a kid. She said music keeps the heart open. He played a few slow chords. The sound wrapped around the room, warm and low. Amara closed her eyes for a moment. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, filled with emotion that didn't need words. When he stopped, the silence that followed felt almost sacred. Why did you stop playing? She asked softly. He looked at the piano keys, then at her. Because I stopped believing I had something worth playing for. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Maybe you just forgot what it felt like. Their eyes met again, and the space between them grew heavy with something unspoken. A connection that didn't need to be explained. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that hides pain. You're not what I expected, Amara. What did you expect? Someone who would fade into the background. But you, he said, his gaze steady. You make silence feel full. Her breath caught for a second. The fire crackled softly behind them, the sound of rain returning outside, faint and distant. I should go, she whispered after a long pause. He nodded slowly. All right, but neither of them moved. The clock ticked once. Twice. Finally she stood. He walked her to the door, stopping just as she reached for the handle. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For listening. She smiled, and it's small, real. You should do that more often. He tilted his head. Talk? No, she said gently. Feel. And with that she left. The door closed softly behind her. He stood there for a long time, listening to the rain, to the echo of her footsteps fading down the hall. Then he looked back at the piano. His hand hovered over the keys again. Slowly he pressed one note, then another, and the music began to return, soft, hesitant, alive again. The night had grown quiet again. Outside, the city lights blinked softly under a pale moon, and the sound of distant thunder rolled like a memory. Inside Ethan's penthouse, everything felt still. Too still, except for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the faint ticking of the clock. Amara stood near the sink, washing the last of the dishes. She was supposed to leave an hour ago, but he had asked her to stay for tea. She didn't know why she'd said yes. Maybe because of the way his voice had sounded. Tired but gentle, as if he needed someone to stay. Ethan sat at the counter, his sleeves rolled up, his hands loosely holding a warm cup. The light above them glowed gold, casting soft shadows across his face. He looked calm, but his eyes were lost somewhere far away. You should rest, she said quietly. It's getting late. He looked up, half smiling. I could say the same to you. I don't sleep early, she said. Why not? She hesitated, then shrugged. Silence keeps me awake. He nodded slowly as if he understood. Funny, he said. Silence is the only thing that lets me sleep. Their eyes met for a second, a long second that neither of them tried to escape. The air between them felt heavy but soft, filled with something invisible and warm. He set his cup down. Can I ask you something personal? She hesitated. That depends. He smiled faintly. You're careful. I have to be, she said. The world doesn't go easy on careless people. He studied her for a moment, then asked quietly, Have you ever been in love? Her hands froze mid-motion. The water kept running, the soft splash filling the silence. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled a little. No, never? He asked, surprised. She shook her head. I've seen people fall in love and lose themselves. My mother used to say love is like fire, warm when you're close, but it burns if you touch it too long. He looked at her thoughtfully. And you believed her? For a long time, yes, she said. But now, I don't know. He leaned back slightly, watching her. You should know something, he said softly. Fire isn't always meant to burn. Sometimes it's meant to keep you alive. She turned her head slowly, her eyes meeting his again. For a moment, neither of them moved. Only the hum of the lights and the soft drumming of rain against glass filled the air. He stood walking toward the window. The city shimmered below him, alive and distant. "You know," he said, his voice quiet but steady, "I've had everything money can buy, but it never filled the space where love should have been." Amara didn't reply. She just listened, drying her hands slowly. He turned slightly, his gaze still distant. "I used to think emotions made people weak. I thought caring was a distraction. But now?" His voice trailed off. "Now I see it's the only thing that makes us human." Her chest tightened. There was something different in his tone tonight. No coldness, no guarded edge. Just truth. She walked closer, her steps soft against the floor. "You talk like someone who's learning to feel again," she said gently. He gave a small smile. "Maybe I am." For a while they both stood there, close but not touching. The soft sound of rain grew stronger, filling the silence with rhythm. Amara looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the millionaire, not the confident man who gave orders, but someone fragile, someone trying to rebuild what life had broken. "Can I tell you something?" she whispered. He turned fully now, his eyes on hers. "Of course." "I've never been close to anyone before," she said, her voice trembling just a little. "I don't know how it feels to trust someone completely. Every time I tried, they left or used me, so I stopped trying." His expression softened. "And now?" "Now." She hesitated, searching for words. "Now I'm scared that if I trust again, I'll lose myself too." Ethan's gaze deepened, his voice low. "You won't lose yourself with the right person. You'll find more of who you are." Her eyes flickered down. "And how do you know who the right person is?" He stepped closer, slow, careful, deliberate. The air between them thickened with quiet emotion. "You don't," he said softly. "You just feel it. You stop fighting it. You let it find you." The room fell silent again. Only the rain, the hum of the fridge, and their soft breathing remained. Her heart raced. His presence felt overwhelming. Not in a frightening way, but in a way that made everything around her disappear. She didn't step back, and neither did he. "Ethan," she whispered. "Yes?" She wanted to say something, anything, but her voice failed. There was too much she didn't understand, too much she couldn't name. The silence spoke for her instead. He noticed the fear in her eyes, and the tenderness in his face deepened. He lifted his hand but stopped midway, unsure if he should. Then slowly, gently, he brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His touch was light and careful, almost reverent. She didn't move. Her eyes stayed on his, wide and searching. The moment hung between them, fragile as glass. Then she whispered, barely audible, "I've never been touched like that before." His hand froze. His breath caught. He realized what she meant, and suddenly the weight of her words filled the room like thunder before a storm. He stepped back slowly, eyes full of surprise and something deeper. Regret, maybe. "Amara," he said softly, his voice almost breaking. She shook her head quickly. "It's okay. You didn't do anything wrong." He exhaled shakily, running a hand through his hair. "I didn't know." "I know," she said, her voice trembling but calm. "That's why I told you." The rain kept falling, soft but endless. The air between them was heavy with everything they couldn't say. When she finally turned to leave, he whispered, "You trust me, don't you?" She paused at the door, looking back with quiet eyes. "I don't know yet," she said honestly, "but I want to." And then she walked out, slow steps fading into the hallway. Ethan stood alone, staring at the space she had left behind. The firelight flickered across his face as he whispered to himself, "So do I." The clock ticked on, steady and slow, marking the start of something neither of them fully understood. Something fragile, something real. The next morning, sunlight returned to the city after days of rain. Golden light poured through the penthouse windows, glimmering off polished floors and glass walls. But inside, the air was still, as if even the morning was holding its breath. Amara stood near the kitchen counter, preparing coffee as usual. The soft hum of the machine filled the silence. Her movements were calm, but inside her thoughts twisted like threads. She couldn't stop replaying last night. The way he looked at her when she said, "I've never been touched like that before." The way his voice had cracked with shock and guilt. She hadn't meant to tell him. The truth had slipped out like a secret she didn't even know she was holding. And now she didn't know what to expect. The elevator chimed behind her. His footsteps were slow, steady, but quieter than usual. Ethan entered the kitchen wearing a simple gray shirt, no tie today. His face looked tired, his eyes softer, uncertain. "Good morning," she said carefully, not looking up. "Morning," he replied, his tone calm, but his voice carried hesitation, as if he was afraid of saying the wrong thing. The soft clink of the coffee cup filled the pause between them. She placed his cup in front of him and turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Amara," he said quietly. She froze, then turned slowly. "Yes?" He took a deep breath, his fingers brushing the edge of the counter. "About last night?" Her stomach tightened. "You don't need to say anything." "Yes, I do." His voice was gentle but firm. "I didn't know. And when I realized—" He paused, searching for the right words. It wasn't just surprise, it was respect. Her eyes widened slightly. "Respect?" He nodded. "You trusted me enough to tell me something personal. I don't take that lightly." For a moment she couldn't speak. His words were simple, but they carried weight, not pity, not judgment, just understanding. "I wasn't trying to shock you," she said quietly. "I know. I just didn't want you to misunderstand me." He smiled faintly. "I never did." Their eyes met, a long, silent connection that spoke louder than anything else. The soft hum of the morning filled the space between them, warm and gentle. Hours passed. She stayed longer than usual, helping him organize some old papers in his study. It was the first time she had entered that room. A large space filled with shelves, books, and framed photographs that spoke of another life. "Who's this?" she asked, pointing at a photo on the shelf. Ethan turned. It was a picture of him and a woman, beautiful, elegant, smiling at the camera. "My ex-wife," he said softly. Amara looked at the photo for a moment. "You looked happy." He nodded slowly. "We were once. Until we weren't." She didn't press further. The story was already in his eyes. Loss, guilt, and years of silence that never healed. He picked up the frame, staring at it quietly. "She used to say I didn't know how to love, that I only knew how to protect, and was she right?" He thought for a moment, then whispered, "Maybe. Until now." Amara looked at him confused. "What do you mean?" He placed the frame down and turned toward her, his expression soft but serious. "You make me want to understand it." Her heart skipped a beat. She didn't answer, couldn't. Her mind went blank, her breath shallow. The air between them changed again, thick, silent, and alive. He took a slow step closer. She didn't move. "Ethan," she whispered. "Yes?" His voice was low, almost a breath. She shook her head. "You shouldn't." He smiled faintly, a sad smile. "I know. But I can't seem to stop caring." Her eyes trembled, a tear threatening to fall. "Why me?" "Because you remind me what it means to feel." The room felt smaller now, wrapped in quiet tension. The only sound was the faint hum of rain starting again outside, soft drops tapping the window. He reached forward slowly, as if afraid of breaking something fragile. His fingers brushed her hand, a gentle touch. Cautious and trembling, she gasped softly, not because of fear, but because of how it felt. Safe, real, almost electric. "Don't be afraid," he whispered. "I'm not," she said, her voice shaking. "I just don't know what this is." He looked at her, his expression filled with something raw, tenderness, confusion, maybe even love. "Neither do I," he admitted. "But it feels like truth." Her heart pounded in her chest. She stepped closer without realizing it, their distance now just a breath apart. Then, too suddenly, she stepped back. Her eyes glistened. "I can't," she whispered. He froze. "Did I do something wrong?" "No," she said, shaking her head. "You've done everything right." "That's the problem," her voice cracked. "All my life, people only wanted things from me. You're the first person who's just kind. I don't know how to handle that." His chest rose and fell with a slow breath. "Amara," he said softly, "I don't want anything from you. I just want you to feel safe here." She looked at him for a long time, her eyes wet. "That's what scares me," she said. "Because maybe I already do." He didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, his expression full of emotion he didn't know how to hide anymore. For a long, quiet minute, they both stood in the golden light of the study, two broken souls trying to understand a feeling neither had expected. Then suddenly, thunder rolled outside. The window rattled. Amara jumped slightly, startled by the sound. and instinctively he reached out to steady her. Her small gasp filled the air. His hands were warm on her shoulders. Her breath quickened, and that was the moment she screamed, not out of fear but surprise at her own reaction. Ethan froze instantly, pulling back as if burned. Her wide eyes met his, shocked, trembling, vulnerable. The silence that followed was thick with realization. He took a step back, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." She shook her head quickly, tears in her eyes. "It's not your fault." But the truth had surfaced, raw and undeniable. The scream wasn't from pain or fear, but from the truth of what she'd never known before. The closeness of someone who cared not for what she could give, but simply because she was there. He stood still, heart pounding. She stood trembling, eyes lowered. In that fragile silence, they both knew something had changed forever. The night had fallen again. The city lights shimmered like stars scattered across the wet streets. Inside the penthouse, everything was still. Too still. Ethan sat alone in the living room, his elbows resting on his knees, his head bowed. The faint hum of the city below drifted through the glass walls, but it couldn't drown out the silence inside him. He could still hear her scream. Short, sharp, full of surprise. It echoed in his head like a wound. He hadn't meant to frighten her. He hadn't even meant to touch her. It had been instinct, to protect, not to cross. But when he saw the look in her eyes, the fear mixed with confusion, he realized how fragile she truly was. Now she was gone. She had left without a word. The clock ticked quietly. Each second felt heavier than the last. He rubbed his face with both hands, whispering to himself, "I hurt her," when all I wanted was to keep her safe. The sound of rain began again. Soft, steady, gentle. It was as if the world outside was crying with him. Across the city, Amara sat in a small cafe near her apartment. The lights were dim, the crowd almost gone. Her hands trembled as she held the warm cup of tea. She hadn't realized how much her voice had shaken when she screamed. It wasn't fear, not really. It was shock. Shock at the way his touch had felt. Warm, safe. Too safe. No one had ever held her like that. Not to harm, not to take, but to care. It had been too much, too soon, too pure for someone like her. She looked out the window, watching the raindrops slide down the glass. Her heart ached, not because he'd done something wrong, but because for the first time she had wanted to trust someone and didn't know how. Her phone buzzed. A message. It was from Ethan. "I'm sorry. I crossed a line I didn't mean to. Please let me explain. I'll wait in the lobby if you want to talk." Her breath caught. He didn't sound like a man defending himself. He sounded broken. She hesitated. Her fingers hovered over the screen. She could ignore him. She could walk away and let this strange, confusing connection fade. But her heart didn't let her. She typed back, "I'll come. Just talk, nothing else." And then, before she could think too long, she grabbed her coat and stepped into the rain. The elevator doors opened to the quiet penthouse lobby. The air smelled faintly of fresh flowers and rain. Ethan stood near the entrance, his hands in his pockets, eyes heavy with guilt. When she stepped out, his breath caught. She looked fragile, not from weakness but from honesty. Her hair damp, her eyes soft but guarded. "Amara," he said quietly. She didn't reply. She just stood there, waiting. He took a slow step forward. "Thank you for coming." "I said I'd listen," she replied, her voice calm but distant. He nodded, his throat tightening. "I owe you an apology. For everything. For making you uncomfortable, for—" She interrupted softly. "You didn't hurt me." He looked at her, disbelief in his eyes. "Then why did you scream?" She took a deep breath, her fingers twisting together. "Because I didn't know what it felt like to be touched by someone who wasn't trying to take something from me." He froze, her words hitting him harder than anything. Her eyes glistened as she continued. "You didn't cross any line. You were kind, too kind, and that scared me." Ethan's voice trembled when he spoke. "I would never want to scare you, Amara, never." "I know," she said softly. "That's why I came back." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The rain outside tapped against the glass, a soft rhythm that matched the beating of their hearts. "I didn't want to lose your trust," he whispered. "I don't know how, but you've become important to me." She looked at him, her eyes full of quiet sadness. You didn't lose my trust, Ethan. I just don't know how to give it fully yet, he nodded slowly. Then I'll wait. Her lips parted, surprised. Wait, yeah, he said. For as long as it takes. I don't want to rush what doesn't need rushing. Something in her chest softened, a warmth spreading through the cold corners of her heart. You don't have to do that, she said gently. He smiled faintly. I want to. The rain grew heavier outside and a soft clap of thunder rolled in the distance. The sound filled the silence between them, not awkward but calming. She took a few steps closer, her voice quiet. I didn't mean to make you feel guilty. I just didn't understand what was happening. I've never felt that kind of closeness before. He met her eyes, his voice steady but tender. Neither have I. That made her look up. You? He nodded. I've been with people, yes. But not like this. Not where it matters. For the first time since she arrived, a small smile touched her lips. It was shy, fragile, but real. Then maybe, she said softly, we're both learning. Ethan stepped forward. Not close enough to touch, just enough to let his words reach her clearly. Then let's learn slowly together. Her eyes filled with emotion. The sound of her quiet breathing mixed with the hum of rain, creating a soft, tender melody that seemed to fill the entire space. After a moment, she nodded. All right, he smiled, a deep, grateful smile that lit up the sadness in his face. All right, he repeated. They stood there for a long time. Two people who had finally spoken the truth they had both been afraid of. When she finally turned to leave, he didn't stop her. Instead, he said softly, Thank you for forgiving me. She looked back at him with gentle eyes. There was nothing to forgive, and as the elevator doors closed, he whispered to himself, Then maybe there's still hope. That night, as Amara lay in bed, the sound of the rain returned, soft, steady, comforting. She closed her eyes and thought about his words. He said he'd wait, and for the first time in a long while, she believed someone actually would. Morning light poured gently through the wide glass windows of the penthouse. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a calm, golden world. Drops still clung to the glass, glittering like small diamonds as the city slowly came alive below. Inside, the silence was peaceful, not heavy this time, but warm. There was no tension in the air, no weight of confusion or guilt, just quiet understanding, like the pause between heartbeats when everything feels still but alive. Ethan sat by the window, a cup of coffee in his hands. He looked out at the city, lost in thought. The sound of the clock ticking nearby was soft and steady like breathing. He hadn't expected to see her again so soon, but when the elevator chimed and Amara stepped inside the room, he didn't question it. He only smiled, the kind of smile that spoke without words. She carried a small basket of breakfast things. I thought you might want something light, she said softly. He rose from his seat, surprised but grateful. You didn't have to. I wanted to, she replied, placing the basket on the table. It's just toast, eggs, and some fruit. It's perfect, he said. His voice was low, gentle, almost reverent. They moved around the kitchen together without much talking. The sound of clinking plates, the light crackle of bread in the toaster, and the faint hum of the refrigerator filled the silence like background music. But it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was calm, full of unspoken things neither dared to voice. When she handed him a plate, their fingers brushed. Just a small touch, but both froze. This time there was no fear, no confusion, only quiet awareness. Ethan looked at her hand for a moment, then at her eyes. You're not trembling anymore, he said softly. Her lips curved faintly. Maybe I'm getting used to you. He smiled back, something tender in his gaze. I hope that's a good thing. It is, she said simply. They sat across from each other at the dining table. Sunlight bathed the room in a soft golden glow. Neither spoke much. Their eyes met sometimes, then drifted away again. The silence spoke for them, about trust, about patience, about the strange comfort that had begun to grow between them. At one point, she looked up and asked, Do you ever get tired of all this quiet? Ethan thought for a moment. Not anymore, he said. Not when you're here. Her cheeks flushed slightly, but she didn't look away. You say things that sound simple, but they don't feel simple. He chuckled softly. That's because they're true. Her gaze softened. You used to hide behind silence, she said. Now you fill it. And you, he replied gently, used to run from it. Now you make it beautiful. Their words faded into stillness again, the kind that didn't need to be broken. Later that day, they moved to the sitting area by the large window. The light had changed, softer now, a faint orange hue as evening began to stretch across the sky. Amara sat curled on the sofa, her knees pulled slightly close while Ethan sat opposite her, reading something on his tablet. The distant sound of traffic and the hum of the city below played like a lullaby. She watched him quietly. He wasn't the cold, serious man she'd met weeks ago. His shoulders were more relaxed, his eyes warmer. There was a calmness in him now, something she never thought she'd see. "What are you reading?" she asked softly. He looked up, smiling faintly. "An old novel, one my mother loved. Is it good?" "It's sad," he said, "but it's real." "Maybe that's why she loved it," she replied. "The sad things remind us we're still alive." He studied her for a moment. "You speak like someone who's seen a lot of sadness." "I have," she said quietly. "But lately, I've been seeing more peace than I thought I could." He set the tablet aside, leaning forward. "Because of me?" She looked down, her fingers playing with the edge of her sleeve. "Maybe, or maybe because I stopped running from what feels right." The words lingered between them like a gentle echo. He wanted to say something true, something deep, but he didn't. Instead, he reached out slowly, resting his hand on the table between them, close enough for her to see, but not to touch, a quiet invitation. She looked at it for a moment, then placed her hand near his, not quite meeting, just close enough to feel warmth between them. The silence stretched again, soft, golden, full of meaning. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. Outside, the sky turned a deep orange, then violet. The room grew dim, but neither of them moved to turn on the lights. The fading glow wrapped them both in a quiet serenity, like the world had slowed down just for them. After a while, Amara whispered, "You make me feel calm." Ethan smiled gently. "You make me feel human." She laughed softly, the sound delicate as wind chimes. "You weren't before? I was, but only on paper," he said, his eyes thoughtful. "Now I feel things that don't come with numbers or names." Her heart tightened. "That sounds scary." "It is," he admitted. "But it's the best kind of fear." Their eyes met again, and the moment stretched, long and quiet and full. The silence spoke for them again, saying, "I see you. I trust you, I'm here." Outside, the first stars appeared, faint but bright enough to be noticed. The ticking of the clock slowed in rhythm with their breathing, calm and steady. Amara leaned back against the sofa, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sometimes words ruin things." Ethan looked at her, smiling softly. "Then let's stay quiet." And so they did. The room filled with the sound of gentle breathing, the quiet city beyond, and the unspoken promise that neither of them was ready to name yet. For the first time in years, silence didn't mean emptiness. It meant peace. It meant something growing softly, quietly in the spaces between words. Morning light painted the penthouse in soft shades of gold. The air smelled faintly of coffee and fresh bread. The city outside was alive with quiet movement. Cars humming, distant horns, a few birds singing near the balcony. Amara stood by the counter, slicing strawberries for breakfast. The soft scrape of the knife against the wooden board mixed with the slow ticking of the clock. Every sound felt peaceful, familiar, like part of a slow song that only the two of them could hear. Ethan walked in moments later, still half-dressed in a crisp white shirt. His sleeves rolled up, his tie hanging loose around his neck. His hair was slightly messy, and his eyes carried that calm warmth she had come to know so well. "Good morning," he said, his voice low but soft. She turned and smiled. A real smile, easy and bright. "Good morning." He noticed something. "You seem happier today." "Maybe I am," she said. "Maybe it's because the world feels quiet again." He chuckled, pouring himself coffee. "You like the quiet now?" She nodded. "When you're in it, yes." The words slipped out before she could stop them. For a second she froze, her face flushing slightly. But Ethan didn't tease her. He just smiled, that calm, knowing smile that said he understood what she meant. "I'm glad," he said softly, "because the quiet used to feel like loneliness to me." She looked at him thoughtfully. "And now?" "Now it feels like peace." The silence that followed was gentle. filled with something deeper than comfort, connection. After breakfast, they sat by the window again, the same spot where so many of their conversations had begun. The sunlight glowed across their faces. The city stretched out endlessly below, but neither of them looked down. They looked at each other instead, quietly, like two people afraid to break a fragile calm. Ethan broke the silence first. "Amara," he said slowly, "can I ask you something?" She nodded, curious. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" She tilted her head. "Next? Yes," he said. "After this? After mornings like this? After all of it?" Her gaze softened, but her voice carried a hint of sadness. "I try not to," she admitted. "Because good things, they don't always stay." He frowned slightly. "You think this won't?" She hesitated, her fingers tightening around her cup. "I don't know. People leave. Life changes. Maybe I've just learned not to expect things to last." Ethan leaned forward, his voice gentle but steady. "Then let me be the first person who doesn't leave." Her eyes widened slightly, as if she wasn't sure she heard him right. "You don't mean that?" "I do," he said simply. "I can't promise forever, no one can. But I can promise honesty. I can promise I won't hurt you on purpose. And I can promise I'll stay until you ask me to go." She stared at him, speechless for a moment. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of truth. "Why?" she finally whispered. He looked at her. Not with the eyes of a man who wanted to impress, but of someone who had learned to feel again. "Because you make me remember who I am," he said. "Not Ethan Miles, the millionaire. Just Ethan." Her throat tightened. She looked down at her hands. "You don't know what that means to me." "Then tell me," he said softly. She took a deep breath. "It means I don't feel invisible anymore." Those words hit him like a quiet thunder. He reached out slowly, resting his hand near hers on the table. He didn't touch her, not yet. He just waited. After a pause, she placed her hand on top of his. Their fingers didn't intertwine, but the warmth was enough to say what words couldn't. For a long while, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the city and their soft breathing. Then she whispered, "Do you really mean your promise?" He looked at her, eyes calm but serious. "With everything I have." A small tear slipped down her cheek. Not from sadness, but from something deeper. Relief. He noticed it, but said nothing. Instead, he gently reached forward and wiped it away with his thumb. The touch was light, careful, filled with quiet respect. Amara didn't flinch this time. She just looked at him and whispered, "Then I'll trust you." Ethan's lips curved into a slow smile. That's all I ever wanted. The rest of the day moved in slow rhythm. They worked side by side, she organizing the shelves, he reviewing files. Sometimes they spoke. Sometimes they didn't. But the silence between them was no longer empty. It was full of promises, of peace, of unspoken emotion. As evening came, the sunlight turned orange and soft. Ethan stood by the window again, watching the horizon. Amara walked up beside him, holding 2 cups of tea. "Do you ever think," she said quietly, handing him a cup, "that maybe some people meet exactly when they're supposed to?" He looked at her, smiling faintly. "I do now." They stood together, sipping tea, watching the city fade into night. The reflection of their silhouettes merged in the glass. 2 outlines, close but not touching, bound by something unseen. When she finally spoke again, her voice was almost a whisper. "Then maybe this is enough," she said. He looked at her. "What is?" "This," she said softly. "The quiet. The peace. The knowing someone cares without needing to say it." He smiled, a smile that reached his eyes. "Then I promise to keep that too." She turned her head slightly, their eyes meeting in the glass reflection. "You already have." Outside, the first stars blinked awake. Inside, the silence spoke again, but this time it wasn't silence at all. It was a language made of trust, warmth, and something tender that neither of them dared to name. And as the city fell asleep beneath them, one truth stayed, simple and unbreakable. Some promises don't need to be spoken aloud to last. The week passed slower than any before. For the first time since Amara had entered his life, the penthouse felt cold again. The soft hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of the clock, sounds that once felt peaceful, now echoed through emptiness. Ethan sat by the window, a half-empty coffee cup beside him, staring at the skyline that had lost its color. She hadn't come in 3 days. No messages. No calls, just silence. He told himself she needed time. That maybe she was overwhelmed. That maybe his promise, the one he made so earnestly, had scared her instead of soothing her. But the longer the silence stretched, the harder it became to believe his own words. The city moved on outside his glass walls. Bright lights, rushing people, laughter far below. But his world had gone quiet again, and he hated it. He stood up, pacing slowly across the floor. His reflection followed him in the glass. The man who had once thrived on solitude now looked smaller in it, weaker, lonelier. Across the city, Amara sat in her small apartment, staring at the rain sliding down her window. The streets glowed beneath the soft streetlights. She held a cup of tea, but it had gone cold long ago. She had been avoiding him. Not because she wanted to, because she didn't know how to face him anymore. Every moment with Ethan had begun to feel too real, too close. His words, his eyes, the way he listened, they stayed in her mind even when she tried to sleep. He had promised her honesty, safety, and patience, and that scared her more than anything. No one had ever stayed. Everyone she'd trusted had either left or changed. What if he did the same? What if the peace she'd found with him was just another temporary kindness? Her heart whispered one thing, he means it. Her fear whispered another, no one ever does. She pressed her forehead to the cool glass and closed her eyes. She missed him, his voice, his quiet laughter, even his silence. But she needed to be sure this wasn't just another illusion. She needed to see if he would wait. Days turned into a week. Ethan tried to work, but the numbers on his screen blurred. He tried to play the piano again, but every note sounded wrong. Even his coffee tasted bitter. Every evening he found himself glancing toward the elevator doors, hoping they'd open. But they never did. On the 8th day, he finally gave up pretending. He picked up his phone and typed a short message. I hope you're okay. That's all I want to know. He didn't send it right away. His thumb hovered over the button for a long time before he finally pressed send. Then he waited. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Then 2. No reply. He leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes. Maybe she needs the distance, he whispered to himself. Maybe I need it too. But the truth was, he didn't. He had never needed anyone before. Now he didn't know how to live without her. That night the rain returned. Soft, steady, endless. It was almost comforting, like the world was trying to remind him of her. He sat on the couch with a book he didn't read. Around midnight he finally stood and walked to the balcony. The air was cool and wet. The city lights glimmered through mist. He whispered into the rain, "Come back when you're ready. I'll still be here." The words disappeared into the wind, but saying them felt right. 2 more days passed before her reply came. I'm okay. I just needed to think, that was all. Just 10 words. But Ethan smiled when he read them. It was the first time in days that the quiet didn't feel so heavy. He typed back, "That's enough for me. I'm here whenever you want to talk." He didn't press her for more. He didn't ask why. He just kept his promise and to wait. Amara read his message 3 times. Each word felt like warmth she didn't know how to hold. No anger, no questions, just patience. She set the phone down and let out a shaky breath. He hadn't given up on her. He hadn't tried to fix her. He just waited exactly as he'd said he would. The tears came quietly, not from sadness, but from the soft ache of being seen, truly seen, and still accepted. That night, she dreamed of sunlight through curtains, of quiet laughter, of hands that didn't demand anything, only offered comfort. And when morning came, she finally made up her mind. The elevator doors opened in the penthouse later that day. Ethan turned sharply, almost not believing what he heard. Amara stood there, her eyes tired but bright, her hair damp from rain, a small, hesitant smile on her lips. He didn't speak at first. He just looked at her, relief flooding his chest. "I didn't mean to stay away so long," she said softly. "I just needed to make sure I wasn't running again." He stepped closer, his voice low. "And are you?" She shook her head. "No, not this time." Ethan exhaled, a sound that was half a sigh and half a laugh. "You have no idea how long this week felt." Her smile grew. "I think I do." He chuckled softly, then added, Did you find what you were looking for? She nodded slowly. Yes, I found peace. He looked into her eyes, the world softening around them again. Does that mean you're staying? Amara smiled gently. It means I'm not leaving because of fear. The silence that followed said everything. He didn't touch her. She didn't step closer. But something invisible between them finally settled. Calm, sure, true. That night, the city lights reflected off the windows like distant stars. The rain had stopped again, leaving the air fresh and clear. They sat together quietly, the same way they always had, close yet respectful, bound by something quiet and strong. Sometimes love doesn't arrive with fireworks or grand words. Sometimes it's a promise kept, even in distance, and in that still night. As they sat side by side, both knew the promise was real. The morning after she returned felt different, softer, lighter, almost like the world itself had exhaled. Sunlight spilled across the floor of the penthouse, glowing gold against the marble tiles. The scent of coffee and faint vanilla filled the air. Outside, the city stretched awake beneath a pale blue sky. Ethan stood by the window, phone in hand, rereading her last message. It means I'm not leaving because of fear. He didn't realize he'd been smiling since dawn. When the elevator chimed, he turned instinctively. She stepped out, holding a small paper bag and a shy smile. Morning, she said softly. He chuckled under his breath. You came early. I couldn't sleep, she admitted. I kept thinking about our promise. He tilted his head slightly. Which part? The part where you said you'd wait, she said, her voice warm and steady now. And I realized, I don't want you waiting alone anymore. For a moment, neither spoke. The quiet filled with sunlight, and something unspoken bloomed between them. He gestured toward the kitchen. Breakfast? She smiled. I brought muffins. Then that's the best breakfast I've had in weeks. They sat at the dining table together, the same place where they had shared silence, laughter, and their first awkward confessions. But this time the quiet between them wasn't heavy. It was familiar, comfortable, full of peace. The sound of coffee being poured, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the clink of spoons. Every small sound felt alive again. Ethan broke the silence first. You've changed. Amara looked up, surprised. Changed? Yes, he said softly. You used to look like you were ready to run. Now you look like you've decided to stay. She smiled gently. Maybe that's because I stopped being afraid of what I feel. He met her gaze, his voice quiet. And what do you feel? She hesitated for a moment, her eyes tracing the rim of her coffee cup. Peace, safety, maybe. Something more. Ethan leaned forward slightly, not pressing, just listening. Something more? Her voice was a whisper now. Something I don't have a word for yet. He smiled faintly, his tone soft and teasing. Then maybe we'll name it together. She laughed quietly, shaking her head. You always say things that sound simple but feel too big. Maybe that's what truth sounds like, he replied. Their eyes met again, and for a long moment they didn't look away. Later that morning, they walked out onto the balcony. The wind was gentle, carrying the faint scent of rain and blooming jasmine from the garden below. The city buzzed quietly, far beneath their world of calm. Amara leaned on the railing, watching the skyline. When I was younger, she said softly, I used to think peace meant being alone. That silence meant safety. And now? Ethan asked. She smiled slightly. Now I think peace is when you can be quiet with someone and still feel heard. He turned to her, his expression thoughtful. That's exactly how I feel when you're here. Her heart thudded softly. She didn't answer. Instead, she looked out at the horizon, at the sunlight melting into the morning haze. For a long time, they stood side by side, not speaking, just breathing the same air. The quiet between them was no longer awkward. It was home. Then, without turning, she whispered, Why did you wait for me? Ethan's voice was calm, honest. Because you were worth waiting for. She looked up at him then, really looked, and saw no hesitation in his face, no distance in his eyes. Only truth, and for the first time she didn't look away. Later that evening, they sat on the couch together as soft rain returned, painting silver streaks down the windows. A movie played quietly in the background, but neither of them watched it. Amara had her knees tucked beneath her, holding a cup of tea. Ethan sat beside her, closer than usual, his arm resting along the back of the sofa. At one point, she set her cup down and sighed. "Do you ever feel like everything in life led you to one moment?" He glanced at her. "This one?" She nodded slowly. "Yes, this one." Ethan's smile was small, but it reached his eyes. "Then I guess we both took the long way here." Her laughter was soft, a sound that had once been rare but now came easily. Maybe the long way was the only way. The rain grew heavier outside, the sound like a gentle song wrapping around them. He turned toward her, his voice low and sincere. "Amara, you should know something." She looked at him, curious. He continued, his tone careful. "When you left, I realized something important. I didn't miss the help. I didn't miss the cooking or the quiet. I missed you. Just you." Her breath caught, he went on, his voice breaking slightly. "And when you came back, it felt like the world finally started again." She stared at him, her eyes shimmering. "You mean that?" He nodded slowly. "With everything I have." Amara blinked back, tears, her lips trembling. "You make me feel seen, like I'm not just someone passing through your life." He shook his head gently. "You're not passing through, Amara. You've already changed everything." She exhaled shakily, looking down. "I don't know what this is between us, but it feels real." He smiled softly. "Then let's not rush to name it. Let's just live it." The rain softened again. The light from the window fell over them in gold and gray. Neither moved for a long while, and then, slowly, without a word, she rested her head against his shoulder. He froze at first, unsure, then relaxed, his hand resting gently on the armrest beside her. No grand gestures. No confessions. Just warmth. Just quiet. The movie kept playing. The rain kept falling. The world kept turning. But for them, that moment was everything. The quiet return, the still promise, the gentle truth that love doesn't always arrive with thunder. Sometimes it comes back softly, like morning after a long night. The days that followed were quiet, the kind of quiet that felt earned, like the calm after a long storm. The city outside glowed with late autumn light, and the mornings were softer, slower, warmer. Amara had begun arriving early, not out of duty anymore, but out of habit, out of want. She would hum softly while preparing coffee, her voice barely above the sound of the morning breeze. Ethan would sit by the window pretending to read, though his eyes always followed her. They didn't talk much these days, and they didn't need to. The silence between them had become something sacred, not empty, not lonely, but full of quiet understanding. Each glance was a conversation. Each smile a memory in the making, but time, as always, had its own plans. It was a Thursday when the letter came. A single white envelope slipped beneath Ethan's door while he was away in the study. When he picked it up, his name was written in small, neat handwriting. He didn't have to open it to know it was from her. Still, he sat down on the couch, his chest tightening, and unfolded the page. "Ethan, I don't know how to write this without breaking something inside me, but I have to go home. My mother's health has worsened, and I can't stay here pretending I belong in a world that isn't mine. You've given me peace, safety, and kindness, things I never thought I'd have. You didn't fix me. You helped me see I wasn't broken. Thank you for teaching me what love feels like. Not the kind that demands or takes, but the kind that lets you breathe. Please don't look for me. Let this be our quiet goodbye." Amara, he read it twice, then a third time. By the fourth, the words blurred. Outside, the clouds had begun to gather, soft gray against the horizon. The air smelled like rain again. Always rain when something ended. Ethan set the letter down carefully, his hands trembling slightly. He stood, walked to the window, and pressed a hand against the glass. The city below looked the same, but nothing in him felt the same anymore. That evening, rain began to fall. He didn't turn on the lights. The dim glow from the skyline was enough. The sound of droplets against the glass mixed with the faint echo of the piano, an old melody, the one he hadn't touched since she first listened to him play. The notes were uncertain at first, then steadier, fuller, until the room felt alive again. He wasn't playing to fill the silence. He was playing to remember her, to remember the girl who had entered his home quietly, broken and brave, and somehow taught him how to feel again. Each note carried her laughter, her soft voice, her smile that grew braver each day, and as he played, Tears slipped down his face, silent, unhurried, honest. Far away, on a bus heading out of the city, Amara sat by the window with her bag on her lap. She watched the lights fade, one by one, until the skyline disappeared behind the rain. The city had been a chapter she never expected to write. And Ethan, the story she never expected to find. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through her old photos. There weren't many, but one stood out. A small picture she'd taken by accident of his reflection in the window one morning. He hadn't known. The light had been soft, his face calm. She smiled through tears. "Thank you," she whispered. The bus hummed along the wet road. The rain against the glass sounded just like his piano. Weeks passed. Ethan returned to work, but something in him had shifted. His world was quieter, yet it wasn't empty anymore. The silence she'd once feared had become his closest reminder of her. He kept her note in a drawer, not hidden, just safe. Sometimes he would take it out, unfold it, and read the words again. "You didn't fix me. You helped me see I wasn't broken." Each time he read that line, he felt both ache and peace. He began to walk outside more, something he hadn't done in years. He'd stop by the small cafe on the corner, the same one she once mentioned she liked. The owner would smile and greet him with warmth. He'd smile back, quietly grateful for small human things again. And every morning he brewed coffee for two. One cup stayed untouched. He never stopped that small ritual. Not out of sadness, but memory. Because she had taught him that some promises weren't meant to end with presents. They lived on in what they changed. One evening, months later, as he stood on the balcony, the wind carried the faint scent of rain again. The sky was painted in gold and blue, the same colors as the morning she had first smiled at him. He closed his eyes and whispered into the soft breeze, "Be safe, Amara." In the quiet that followed, he almost heard her laugh, soft, distant, warm, like an echo carried by time. And maybe it wasn't real. Maybe it was just memory, but in that moment it didn't matter. He smiled, because love, he finally understood, wasn't always about holding on. Sometimes it was about letting someone go with peace, and knowing that what you shared still lives quietly in the spaces they left behind. The piano sat in the corner, waiting. He walked to it, sat down, and began to play again. The melody flowed, gentle, heartfelt, full of everything she had awakened in him. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, soft as whispers. The room glowed faintly in golden light, and as he played, he looked toward the empty cup on the table, still warm, still waiting, and smiled through the tears that weren't sad anymore. Because some goodbyes aren't endings. They're just another way to keep love alive.